Welcome to the Obscure Files, where forgotten truths and unsettling mysteries find their voice. Tonight, we revisit one of America's most enduring law and order legends, the story of Buford Pusser, the sheriff who inspired movies, books, and even a kind of Southern folklore. To many, Pusser was the very image of justice, tall, strong, unflinching, a man who took a giant stick, literally, and fought crime with his bare hands. His story was immortalized in the 1973 film Walking Tall, and for decades, towns across Tennessee celebrated his legacy with festivals, museums, and memorials. But legends, as history teaches us, are often polished at the expense of truth. And the truth that has recently emerged from old case files, autopsy reports, and forensic analysis paints a very different picture. A picture not of a fallen hero, but of a man who may have taken the life of his own wife, Pauline, in cold blood, then covered it up with a story of an ambush that fooled generations. The 1960s in Tennessee were not the sleepy picture many imagine. This was the era of illegal moonshine stills, gambling rings, and organized crime seeping in from Mississippi. Corruption was rampant. Lawmen looked the other way, and those who didn't often found themselves in danger. Pusser, with his sheer size and willingness to confront bootleggers directly, became a folk hero. By 1964, he was elected sheriff of McNairy County at just 27 years old, the youngest in the county's history. Almost immediately, his image as a crime buster began to grow. Newspaper headlines carried stories of daring raids. Locals whispered about his enormous hickory stick, which he wielded as a weapon against criminals. Hollywood would later seize on this image, the lone sheriff who fought the Dixie Mafia, who stood against vice and corruption. Walking Tall turned his life into myth. But myths are crafted, and they omit the fractures beneath the surface. According to the official version, one that remained unchallenged for decades, Buford and Pauline were ambushed on New Hope Road, not far from their home. Around 4 in the morning, Pusser claimed he had received a call about a disturbance. Pauline, concerned for his safety, insisted on joining him. As they drove, gunfire erupted. Bullets shattered glass and tore through metal. Pauline was struck in the head and killed instantly. Buford himself was wounded, his jaw shattered, leaving him with lifelong scars. He would undergo multiple reconstructive surgeries. The sheriff's survival and his visible disfiguration cemented the legend. He became the tragic hero, the lawman who lost his wife in the line of duty. Newspapers ran sympathetic profiles. The case was chalked up to Dixie Mafia retribution, part of Buford's war on organized crime. And so, for the next half-century, the story stood unquestioned. But now we know, the ambush was likely a fabrication. The wounds didn't match the story. The blood evidence told a different tale. And Buford Pusser, the man lionized as a warrior against crime, may have been hiding the darkest crime of all, murdering the woman he vowed to love and protect. This is where our investigation begins. By the mid-1960s, Sheriff Buford Pusser was a larger-than-life figure in McNairy County. He was the tall man with the scarred face, the sheriff who busted moonshine stills with his bare hands, who challenged the Dixie Mafia, who became the symbol of small-town justice. But behind that public image, life at home was unraveling. As sheriff, Buford Pusser's days and nights were rarely their own. The phone rang at all hours. Reports of bootleggers, domestic disputes, stolen livestock, barroom fights. McNairy County had long been a hub for vice, particularly along the state line with Mississippi. Illegal gambling dens operated in the shadows, protected by local corruption. Moonshiners brewed their product deep in the woods, guarded by men with rifles who wouldn't hesitate to fire on trespassers. It was dangerous work, and Buford embraced it with theatrical intensity. But every raid, every newspaper profile, every headline that read "Sheriff Strikes Again" added to the pressure. Pauline was expected to stand behind him, attending community events, hosting fundraisers, keeping the household in order while raising their 2 young children. In public, she was the supportive sheriff's wife. In private, things were more complicated. Neighbors later recalled raised voices coming from the Pusser home. Pauline, though outwardly devoted, was said to have confided in friends about Buford's temper. A family member described her as walking on eggshells, careful not to provoke him. These weren't the kinds of stories that made it into newspapers. In fact, in small southern towns in the 1960s, domestic disputes were rarely spoken of publicly at all. It wasn't until decades later, when her body was exhumed, that the hints became undeniable. Pauline carried an old healed nasal fracture, the kind consistent with blunt force trauma, the kind consistent with abuse. But in 1967, she remained silent. Divorce was rare, stigmatized. Leaving a prominent man like Sheriff Buford Pusser would have carried enormous social weight. And so, Pauline endured. Meanwhile, Buford's legend grew. The sheriff was invited to speak at civic clubs, appeared in regional newspapers, and even drew the attention of national outlets who were fascinated by the giant lawman of Tennessee. His reputation as incorruptible became his armor. Few dared to question him. That armor would prove critical when tragedy struck. Because in a town where a man was idolized, where people literally cheered as he paraded through festivals, his word would be taken as fact. In the weeks leading up to Pauline's death, there were subtle but telling signs of growing strain. A close friend of Pauline's recalled her saying she feared for her safety. Others noticed she had become more withdrawn, less vibrant than the woman they once knew. Buford, meanwhile, was restless. His war on crime had made him enemies, yes, but it had also made him untouchable. Some historians now argue that this sense of invincibility fed his darker impulses at home. Imagine the pressure cooker, a marriage under stress, a man addicted to his own myth, and a community willing to believe any story he told. This was the backdrop to the night of August 12, 1967, the night Pauline Pusser would lose her life. In our next chapter, we will return to that night, to the official version of events as the world heard them, and to the hidden truths uncovered by forensic science decades later, the so-called ambush that shaped a legend and concealed a crime. August 12, 1967. It was just after 4 a.m. when Sheriff Buford Pusser and his wife Pauline left their home in Adamsville, Tennessee. According to Pusser, he had received a call about a disturbance near New Hope Road. Against his protests, Pauline insisted on joining him. She wanted to ride along, to keep him company, to protect him, even from the dangers he faced nightly. They climbed into the sheriff's patrol car and drove into the dark countryside. Minutes later, everything would change. Here is the version the world heard that morning. As Buford and Pauline approached a stretch of New Hope Road, a car pulled alongside them. Gunfire erupted. Bullets shattered glass and tore through metal. Pauline was struck in the head and killed instantly. Buford himself was wounded, his jaw shattered, leaving him with lifelong scars. He would undergo multiple reconstructive surgeries. The sheriff's survival and his visible disfiguration cemented the legend. He became the tragic hero, the lawman who lost his wife in the line of duty. Newspapers ran sympathetic profiles. The case was chalked up to Dixie Mafia retribution, part of Buford's war on organized crime. And so, for the next half-century, the story stood unquestioned. But now we know, the ambush was likely a fabrication. The wounds didn't match the story. The blood evidence told a different tale. And Buford Pusser, the man lionized as a warrior against crime, may have been hiding the darkest crime of all, murdering the woman he vowed to love and protect. This is where our investigation begins. For decades, the case file of Pauline Pusser's death sat untouched, yellowing in archives, a so-called ambush that was never truly questioned.